It was a typical day at the farm, or so I thought. The sun was shining, the animals were grazing, and I was just minding my own business. But little did I know, my dad had a surprise planned for me, one that would completely change my view of our farm and my relationship with our donkey, Buster. It all started when he told me to grab the camera, but he wouldn't say why. I thought maybe he wanted to film some funny moments with the animals, but I quickly realized this wasn't going to be a casual vlog. My dad, with his usual mischievous grin, had a challenge in mind. He wanted me to do something with Buster that I never thought I'd do, especially on video. Now, you know I love animals, but this was a whole new level of unexpected. At first, I didn't want to do it. I mean, come on, how could anyone possibly think this was a good idea? But my dad was insistent. "Trust me," he said, "you'll thank me later." So there I was, standing in front of Buster, who was eyeing me like he had some kind of plan of his own. And just when I thought I was about to back out, my dad hit record on the camera. Now, I'm sure you're dying to know what happened next, but I'm not going to spoil it just yet. Let's just say that my relationship with Buster was tested in ways I never expected. Things got a lot more complicated than just a fun farm day. I felt every second of it, nervous, unsure, and definitely out of my comfort zone. What happened next, though, is something I never saw coming. Stay tuned, because you won't believe how it all played out. Trust me, you'll be just as shocked as I was. The story's not over yet, and things are about to take a turn that will leave you wondering what my dad's up to next. I stood there, staring at Buster, my heart pounding in my chest. My dad had already begun to chuckle, clearly enjoying the tension in the air. I mean, Buster was a good donkey, sweet, gentle even, but let's be real, I had no idea what my dad was thinking. Why on earth would he want me to do something with Buster that needed to be filmed? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Buster was grazing on some grass, completely oblivious to the weirdness that was unfolding around him. I looked over at my dad, who was now holding the camera and gesturing for me to come closer. "Come on, it'll be fine," he said with that grin again. The kind of grin that made you question whether or not he was messing with you. It wasn't the first time my dad had put me in strange situations, but this was different. Growing up on a farm, I was used to the occasional weird task, feeding the chickens, cleaning out the stables, and even the time he made me help him herd the goats when they got loose, which, by the way, was chaos. But this was different. It wasn't just about farm chores. It felt like my dad had some plan in mind, something he wanted to see unfold on camera. I walked over to Buster slowly, my hands shaking just a little. Don't get me wrong, I loved the donkey. He was funny, sometimes a little stubborn, but he had a great personality. But today, something felt off. I had no idea how I was supposed to handle this. "Okay, just follow my lead," my dad said, his voice more serious now. "It's all about trust." Trust? With Buster? I wasn't so sure. Buster and I had a good understanding. We both knew our roles. But what my dad had planned was throwing me off balance. I could feel the weight of the camera on me, like all of a sudden I was a character in some strange reality show, and my dad was the director pulling all the strings. I stood next to Buster and looked him in the eyes. He nuzzled my shoulder, his usual friendly self, but I still wasn't sure what was coming next. My dad zoomed in with the camera. "All right, get ready," he said, his voice almost too calm. And then my dad gave me the instructions. It sounded simple enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to be. Something told me this wasn't just about Buster or me anymore. This was about the camera, the audience. My dad's plan that I didn't fully understand yet. I took one last glance at Buster, and suddenly the whole situation felt surreal. Was I really about to do this? Was this the moment where everything changed? My dad's voice cut through my thoughts, snapping me back to the moment. "It's simple, just trust him," he repeated. I nodded, but a wave of doubt hit me. Trust Buster? Sure, he was a sweet donkey, but what my dad was asking felt like something out of left field. My palms were sweaty, and I had to shake off the growing knot in my stomach. "All right, let's see what you've got," my dad said, holding the camera steady as if this was all a casual game. He had that look in his eye, the one that told me he wasn't going to let me back out of this. I stepped closer to Buster, who was still munching on some grass, seemingly oblivious to the weird energy around him. I tried to calm myself down, but the pressure was building. The camera was on me. My dad was expecting something. And honestly, I had no clue what would happen next. "Just follow his lead," my dad urged. "Don't overthink it." Easier said than done, right? I reached out to give Buster a gentle pat on the side, but he flinched. That was odd. Buster was usually calm and friendly. Was he picking up on my nervous energy? I backed off a little, giving him some space, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all wrong. For a moment, the world felt still, like everything was hanging in the balance. The camera, my dad's voice, Buster's unpredictable reaction. It was all swirling around me, and I wasn't sure which way to go. "Come on, you've got this," my dad said, urging me on. But did I? Should I just go along with whatever this was, or was I about to make a huge mistake? What was my dad really hoping to see? And why did it feel like something wasn't right? My mind raced, but I couldn't turn back now. There was no easy way out of this. I could feel the tension in the air as I stood next to Buster, his ears flicking every time the wind rustled the leaves. My dad was still filming, his focus so intense that it made everything feel even more surreal. There was a strange energy between me, Buster, and the camera. It was like we were all caught in this unspoken moment, waiting for something to happen. But what? I glanced at my dad, who was smiling, but there was something about the way he was holding the camera, something off. He wasn't giving me any instructions, just watching, waiting. It felt like I was the one expected to make the next move, but I wasn't sure what that move was. I took a deep breath and turned back to Buster, who had finally stopped eating. His big brown eyes met mine, and for a moment, I wondered if he understood the weirdness that was unfolding too. I reached out again, this time more confidently, but Buster took a small step back. That was unusual. Buster usually trusted me completely. Something wasn't right. I stepped forward cautiously, trying to show him I wasn't backing down, but his reaction only made me more uneasy. He turned his head away, his body tense. It was like he was anticipating something. "Go ahead," my dad urged from behind the camera. "You've got this." But what if I didn't? The pressure was mounting, the stakes higher than I ever expected. Every move I made felt like it was being scrutinized, and I could feel the weight of the camera on my every action. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think of what to do next. Suddenly, Buster shifted again, this time more sharply, and I realized just how much he was reacting to my energy. This wasn't just about me and Buster anymore. It was about whether I could follow through on whatever my dad had planned, or if it was all about to fall apart. My hands shook as I tried to figure out how to handle the growing chaos. Something was coming. I could feel it, and I had no idea if I was ready. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the growing tension was almost suffocating. Buster was still shifting nervously, his body language telling me he was no longer the calm, predictable donkey I knew. Something was off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Was it me? Was it the camera? Or was my dad's plan about to backfire in a way I hadn't anticipated? Then, just as I reached out to steady Buster, something unexpected happened. He suddenly jerked backward, hard enough that I had to take a step back to avoid being knocked off balance. My heart skipped a beat as Buster bolted, right toward the wooden fence separating the farm's pasture from the open field. "Hey, Buster!" I called out, but he didn't stop. My mind raced as I watched him gallop, his hooves pounding the ground. The calm, lovable donkey I knew was suddenly acting like a wild animal, and I had no idea why. I rushed after him, adrenaline kicking in, the camera still rolling, my dad's voice distant behind me. "Don't let him get away," my dad shouted, more urgency in his tone now. I didn't need the extra pressure. My pulse was already racing, and as I sprinted after Buster, I realized I wasn't just chasing a runaway donkey. I was chasing something bigger than that. What had triggered this? Was it something I did? Or was my dad's plan, whatever it was, having some unintended side effect on Buster? I skidded to a stop as Buster reached the fence and hesitated, his head turning back toward me with a look that seemed almost confused. But I didn't have time to dwell on that. I had to get him back under control before things escalated further. But then, just as I was about to approach him, I heard a rustling sound from behind me. My dad's voice, now strained and frantic, called out again, but it wasn't aimed at Buster. It was aimed at something or someone else. My gut twisted, and I turned to see my dad's face suddenly drained of color. The camera was shaking in his hands. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Get away from the fence now," he whispered, his tone filled with dread. My stomach dropped. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew whatever was coming next, it was bigger than Buster, bigger than me. Something had shifted, and the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. The suspense was unbearable, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same after this. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. My dad was staring at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Something was wrong, something more than just Buster's strange behavior. I looked around, but the only movement was Buster, who was still at the fence, now calm but standing perfectly still. I could feel the weight of my dad's gaze on me. "What's happening?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" "Just get away from the fence," he repeated, more urgently this time. He took a hesitant step forward, the camera still shaking in his hands, and glanced toward the woods behind the fence. That's when I noticed it, the shadows. Something was moving just beyond the trees. Suddenly, the tension in the air felt suffocating, like something was about to break. I took another step back, keeping my eyes on Buster, who now looked like he was in a trance. What had caused him to act so strange? Why was he standing there, so still? And then it hit me. My dad had been filming this whole time, not just for fun, but because he was waiting for something. Something he knew was coming, something he had planned for. I had been playing, and I had no idea what was waiting for me. Before I could say anything more, the movement in the trees became clear. A figure stepped into view, a man I didn't recognize, tall and wearing a dark hood. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a random person, it was someone who seemed to be moving with purpose, like he had been watching us. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt frozen to the ground. Buster snorted and suddenly broke his trance, his head swinging toward the figure in the trees. My dad stepped forward, blocking my view of the stranger, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never noticed before: fear. "Stay behind me," my dad said, his voice low but firm. "What's going on?" I demanded again, but my dad didn't answer. He just motioned for me to stay quiet. As the figure stepped closer, a horrible realization dawned on me. My dad hadn't been filming for fun. He had been preparing for this moment, for something that had been slowly creeping into our lives. The man in the hood wasn't a random stranger. He was someone from the past, a past I hadn't known about until now. The figure paused just out of reach and raised his hand. My heart pounded in my chest, and the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, in one swift motion, he reached under his hood, revealing a familiar face, someone I thought I'd never see again. It was my uncle. But how? And why was he here? What was he involved in? And why hadn't my dad ever told me about him? The confusion and shock washed over me, but before I could process it all, my dad finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not ready for this." And then everything went black.